What are best practices for evaluating records in family history? How do you know that a record really belongs to your guy? What are some things that you need to watch out for? And how do you resolve the conflicting information, like a different name or a birth date? Is it the right record? Is there some kind of mistake? Things like that. Those are things we're going to be talking about today. Hi, I'm Aimee Cross, and I am here to take your family history to the next level. So let's get started. So when you're evaluating records for family history, there's a few things that you need to consider. The first thing that you need to look at is, does this record even really belong to my person? And how do you know that? How can you determine whether or not the record would even fit? You need to pay attention to a number of things. One, you need to look at the location of the record. Does it fit in what you know of the family timeline? Was the family there at this time? Who are the other people that are in the record? Are they people that you would expect to find in the record? Do we have the correct parents? Do we have the correct siblings? The more points that you can connect together in a record, the better you are in your surety that this is the correct record. So you want to look at things like that location. You want to look at things that are other people in the record. You want to look at things like occupation, where they were born. You also want to maybe sometimes do some back research. And you can do that with the census evaluation and look at the census records in that particular location. If you know the family was in a particular place, you want to look in that particular location for anybody else by that last name or by that name so that you can see whether or not maybe a couple of people are getting confused. That happens more than you realize, particularly as we move back in time, because a lot of cultures had naming patterns. So that's something that you really want to be careful of. That's one way that you avoid mistakes in your tree. The next thing that you want to look at is the quality of the record. Who created it and why did they create it? Who wrote the record, and could they have misunderstood? An enumerator went from house to house and they spoke to various people, and maybe this is an immigrant family who didn't speak English well. Maybe the enumerator couldn't really understand what they were saying. Or maybe they even talked to a neighbor and didn't even talk to the actual family. That's the reason that sometimes there's mistakes in these records as well. On a marriage record, maybe the person walked up to the county clerk and said they wanted to get married, and they said their name, and if they were illiterate and they couldn't write or read, they had no idea what the person was writing down in correspondence to what they were saying. So you need to keep those kinds of things in mind. It's very possible that they just misunderstood, or the other thing that will happen is they will spell things to the best of their ability. Sounds like this, so I'm going to kind of spell it out like that. And that's why you'll see a lot of different name spellings for a particular person. Let me give you this example of William Ziegenfuss. I think I'm saying that right. Here's a picture that somebody put up on Ancestry. And here is his birth record, which we see in the birth record that it's spelled Zigenfoos. Okay, that surname. But then we see in various census records, we saw different spellings of the name. Now, this man was literate. So he actually may have had an effect on how somebody spelled their name, but their name was still spelled incorrectly or differently in different records. So what record would you accept for the correct spelling? Well, I'd take the family Bible because that was written by the family, right? When you see spelling issues, please don't worry about it. It's no biggie. It's something that we are expecting to see. In a death certificate, the information on the birth and family members, the parents of an individual, is provided by the informant. The informant is usually a family member, but not always. And they're going off of their recollections, and they're going off of their recollections at a time of stress. So when I'm looking at a death certificate, I know the death date's probably correct. One, it just happened. Two, it's created by the people that, were around when he died. But the informant's information, the name of the spouse, the age, the date of birth, the location of birth, the names of the parents, those are all things that are really up to the memory of the informant, and they may not be correct. So when you're looking at the record, think about who took the information or provided the information and whether or not there's an opportunity there for that information to maybe be wrong. Another thing kind of along the lines of that to consider is, why was it created? And that can affect the record as well, because people's motivations for certain records can vary depending on why something was created. For instance, a young couple wants to get married in a particular county. They need to be a certain age, so they lie about their age. Or they go over to an adjoining county or state because their laws there are different and they can marry at a younger age, or the people there don't know them and don't know that they're lying about their age. Or like in a draft card, maybe people made themselves a little bit older in order to be able to be drafted, or maybe they made themselves younger because they didn't want to be drafted. So those are things to consider as well. Think about why this record was created and why maybe people may not have been completely honest in the information that they provided in the record. And then the why it was created as well, like I mentioned about the death certificate, will also kind of help you evaluate the information within the record. All right, one of the other things we need to talk about is whether it's an original record or whether it's a transcription. And that can really make a difference, because I don't know about you, but when I'm typing things or copying down things, I make mistakes, and it happens in these records too. So you're always better off if you're working with an original record. Here's the will of Edward Parsons. It's a typewritten will, but the will was written in 1822. So was it really typewritten in 1822? No. One of the other things that I'd like to note is that when you see a record like this, you see that X there. You see the Edward, and then there's an X, and then it says his mark above and below the X, parish, and then seal. When you see an X with the words his mark around it, that means that this individual could not write or sign his name, and so he would mark a document with an X, which was his signature. Now let me give you another example. Here we have some marriage licenses, and these were all written later in a book. So there could be a mistake in spellings or things like that here. Now here's another record that's a marriage bond that was found in a county courthouse book. This marriage bond is a little bit different to me because while the writing in the bond is the same, and I'm not certain who wrote the original bond, I would imagine a court clerk. These signatures are different, but the signatures stand out to me a little bit differently. That makes me believe that maybe these people actually did sign this record. If I saw a spelling in a signature here, I would maybe assume that that was more correct. Does that make sense? All right, so as we're dealing with some of the conflicts, when we have information that's different than what we're seeing regularly, whether it be the name spelling or a birth date or something like that, there's a couple of things to consider. One is how close to the person's life did the event occur? We kind of talked about that before. The closer a record was to a particular individual, the more I'm inclined to believe that that is correct. And remember, at this time period, it wasn't until like the 1920s really that birth certificates were pretty standard. So people didn't have birth certificates. They might have forgotten. Even when you find a delayed birth certificate, that birth certificate has been created based on the memories of the different witnesses and the individual who's asking for the birth certificate. And that can be wrong too. Headstones can be wrong. We have that in our family where somebody, got something wrong and the headstone has the wrong death date on it. It's possible. Sometimes headstones have been created long after the death by family members who want to honor the deceased. And they're going off of whatever records that they have found. I want to show you a little census trick that I have because birth dates are frequently wrong. And this is how I resolve the birth year of somebody. Let me give you an example. So you find somebody in a census record when they're a child, and then you find them when they're an older child, and then you find them when they're an adult, and then you find their death certificate, and the ages are varying. And you're not exactly sure, how old they were or when they were actually born. The death certificate saying that they were born like quite a bit later than you're finding in some of these census records. And then you have a birth and month provided maybe in the death certificate. Maybe you have a birth month provided in the 1900 census, which was the only census that asked for that birth month in the United States in a federal census. And again, sometimes those birth months were guesses, particularly for people that were enslaved. They have no idea when they were born. So if I see a consistent birthday and birth month, like on a headstone or on a death certificate or a birth month in the census record, but then the year just isn't jiving, I will use the earliest census. And the reason being, when I see children listed in a family, they're born like every couple of years. And so by default, that gives you a more accurate age. Now, did the enumerator maybe mix up their names and say one kid was older than another? That is possible, all right? But when I see a family listed at this, I tend to follow that year for their birth a little bit more closely. So let me use this example of James Armstrong. But I'm seeing all of these kids: Eliza, 18, Anna, 16, John, 12, Sarah, 8, Minerva, 6, Melina, 4, and Melissa, 2. So if I later see a record that says Melissa was born in 1860, one, if it's after the census was taken, I know that's not right. Two, I know she was probably not born in 1860. She needed to have been born in probably about 1858. Now, if I see a record that says she was born in 1854, that I also can tell by the order of this family that she probably wasn't born in 1854. She was probably born closer to 1858. So that's my little trick for helping to determine birth dates when birth years, when I'm in doubt. So what about when the location's changed and you're not sure this is your family and you're trying to resolve these location issues? One, look at other records that may give you the information that you need. Look at deeds to see if this family really did sell their land, if they owned land right about the time that you expected them to move between censuses. Sometimes deeds will even tell you that so-and-so of this county was purchasing land here, and it may actually pinpoint the fact that they came from one county and were buying land in another county. You can also look at tax records and see when they disappeared off those tax rolls. That helps you know, yeah, this is my family because they did in fact move. You might also want to take a look at other family members and see, did other family members move with them? Because people, especially in early time periods, they didn't move alone. They moved with their family members. They needed to support one another. They needed to help one another as they started their lives in a new location. So you'll see people from that friends and family network, that fan group, that are moving together, and that can help you identify that this really is your family. And then I'd finally kind of like to deal with the conflict of the name. I have a bizarre one in my family. So this is my ancestor, Thomas Harris. I knew who his father was because I had this family Bible. So on the marriages page in the Bible, I have Thomas Harris married Angie Harmon and the date, and this all fit with the information that I had. And there's a bunch of other family members that are included in the Bible, people that I know, people that I've researched, some people that I actually even personally knew. And then there's this one page in the family Bible that lists T.D. Harris, born August 11th, 1848, his wife Angie, and then their children born in the 1870s and later. But then the first birth page in the Bible listed William Harris with his wife Mary Ann, and then all of these kids. But there's no kid, Thomas. But the person with the same birth date as Thomas, August 11th, 1848, is Robert D. Harris, the son of W.O. and Mary Ann Harris. So, all right. My Thomas Harris is the Robert Harris. And there's some other information in the Bible that kind of proves this. And then this record clearly states that this William O. Harris is the son of Overton and Elizabeth Harris. All right, so then let me look at some family trees. And this record actually kind of solved a family mystery that other genealogists of the Harris family were trying to figure out. So in this census record, in 1850, we see the William Harris family with his wife Mary and the children that are listed in the Bible, including Robert, that's 2 years old. So other descendants of William Harris knew about this Robert Harris, but he disappears. But why Thomas is enumerated as Robert in the census records earlier and even in the family Bible, I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know why he changed his name. There could be a great story there. I don't yet know it. But I do know because of all of the different evidence and some other records that I had compiled about him and his family and family stories and where he was from and how everything was driving together, I knew this to be the case. So we will see things like that happen occasionally. That's pretty extreme. But sometimes you'll see somebody listed by a middle name in one census record and their first name in another census record, or maybe kind of a a nickname in a census record than their real birth name that you might find in a birth certificate or a marriage record. So it's important to keep all those things in mind. It doesn't mean that you have the wrong person. It doesn't mean that something is wrong. We'll find that oftentimes names vary during a place and time, and it doesn't need to be earth-shattering, and you don't need to think, oh my gosh, I have the wrong guy. You just need to prove it with a preponderance of evidence. This really comes down to putting together the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. We're trying to find all the pieces and put them together and make a picture that works. So I hope this has helped you. I hope that you can now better evaluate these records and feel more comfortable about what you are looking at and accepting the records correctly rather than accepting incorrect records or shying away from records that may be correct that you're just a little bit uncertain of. If you would like some other tips on how to be a smart genealogist and accept the correct records, check out this video. Thanks and have a great day.